Hello, friends, and welcome to the January 4th edition of Weekly Witness, the first episode of what will be a very busy 50th anniversary year for Texas Impact, and one in which the Texas Legislature once again convenes in Austin. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week we're previewing the Texas legislative session, which will meet for 140 days in Austin beginning next Tuesday, January 10th. Friends, I hope you all had a meaningful holiday season and a wonderful start to the new year. I also hope you had a chance to get some rest because it will be a busy beginning of the year with the legislature convening, and Texas Impact Weekly Witness will have it all covered for you. We hope this podcast will help resource you to be an effective advocate, and it all begins next week with an interfaith service of public witness on the steps of the Capitol at 9 o'clock a.m. Tuesday, January 10th, and streaming via Texas Impact's YouTube and Facebook pages. If you're able, we'd love to see you in person, but go ahead and make plans now to watch live and schedule a time to watch with your congregation or small group. Texas Impact has been hosting this event for decades, but this time it's unique in that several elected representatives from various faith traditions will be speaking at the event, so you won't want to miss it. If you plan on coming live, go ahead and register online. You can find the announcement on the Texas Impact website at texasimpact.org. And while you're there, check out other opportunities like the United Women in Faith legislative event in January and Interfaith Advocacy Days in February. Register and then share with your friends. As for Weekly Witness, Josh and I will be speaking with members of Texas Impact's legislative engagement groups and rapid response team members Mondays at noon, beginning January 16th on Zoom for a weekly legislative update and Q&A. The legislative update of that section will be recorded and shared, so watch for more information on that. Or go ahead and sign up for the legislative engagement group or rapid response team and join us in the Zoom room live. We will continue to post interviews and conversations with faith leaders, advocates, and elected representatives in the Weekly Witness feed, so make sure you're subscribed and sharing that content. All right, y'all, I think that does it for announcements, so let's prepare for this week's conversation with Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston. Joining us for today's conversation is Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston, here for our first Weekly Witness conversation of 2023. Josh, welcome.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
I missed you over the holidays. We had a couple weeks away. Did you have a chance to rest up and prepare for the 140 days that are coming soon?
I wouldn't say prepare, but it was certainly a good 2 weeks, a needed 2 weeks, and it went by way too fast.
Yeah, well, hopefully the next 140 days will also go by fast, right?
God willing.
Start the clock. So I thought it was important that we start this conversation on the first Weekly Witness of 2023, giving some framing to the legislative landscape in Texas, especially around issues related to faith. Because obviously our listeners are Texans of faith and pay attention to a lot of issues that are important to them. But this legislative session, it seems like in many ways, is going to be a session around religion and religious freedom and how we define those terms. And there's a lot of cognitive dissonance around how different factions view religious freedom or religious liberty, and you've talked a lot about that in the past. But one of the things that's interesting is that we have a lot of legislators who are going to be speaking at the Interfaith Service of Public Witness next week from a lot of different backgrounds. And so I wonder if you can just start off this conversation by talking about the role that faith plays in the public discourse in Texas and how that's going to play out during the legislative session.
Yeah, so every session we have done, as long as I've had this job, at least probably since 1973, a service of public witness on the South Steps to open up the beginning of each legislative session. You know, this time around, we have, 8 legislators committed to being there from basically a wide variety of faith traditions. And we're at a really interesting point in Texas where the political representation is beginning to catch up to the demographics and the changing demographics of the state, which is usual. Usually the demographics change and then the political representation takes a little bit of time to catch up. So just to kind of remind folks about Texas is that, in the last, I'm approximating, but it's been a little bit more than a decade, kind of 12-ish years, we have seen white evangelical Protestants drop from being 23% of the state to about 15% of the state. White mainline Protestants have pretty much maintained and not changed over that time period and been around 12% of the state. Of course, white mainline Protestants tend to be the bulk of Texas Impact's membership. And then you have, a Jewish population at 1%, a growing Muslim population at 1%, Unitarian population a little under 1%. Black Protestants make up about 8% of the state. Buddhist population being 1% of the state. You have this growing diversity present in Texas. And you're starting to see that religious diversity reflected in the members. And so at this Service of Public Witness, it's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, we have Unitarians, Jews, Buddhist, Presbyterian. I'm looking at the list: Methodist, Episcopalian, and then, two, for the very first time in the 88th Legislature, we have two, not just one, but two of the very first Muslims to be elected to the Texas House of Representatives in the Texas Legislature. They were elected at the same time, so it's hard to say which one was first. They were both first. And that is just, super interesting as we see Texas begin to change. But that change is not going to come without a great deal of conflict. Kind of an interesting cognitive dissonance where you begin to see the diversity of the state represented on the House floor, but that leading to a whole lot of religious strife and religious disagreement as a former majority tries to cling and hold on to power, that former majority being white Christendom.
So how do you see that playing out during the legislature?
Yes, it was going to be cantankerous. Let's start with what is freedom, and that is a contested concept. You have one group saying religious freedom is X and another group saying religious freedom is Y. And it's a point where one side says coexist and the other side says that's persecution. And asking for coexistence is not persecution. It's kind of the bare minimum of what the greatest commandment requires of us. But you're seeing it play out in that way where it plays out in the culture wars where people try to impose their religious views on others. So we're going to see that play out in any number of areas. One that's relatively new, it's called ESG, Environmental Social Governance. Basically what it is when a corporation decides to invest in new technology where they're not trying to profit in the next quarter, but they are thinking long-term as to what is in their business's best interest over the next decade. So they may begin to divest from fossil fuels or invest in renewable energy, or you can see this play out in trying to increase diversity on their board or diversity in their employee pool or in their employees. Trying to make sure that they have an inclusive environment for LGBT employees or for LGBT customers, or they're making all sorts of business decisions based on those factors. And there's a big movement. I mean, if you haven't heard their catchphrase, "Go woke, get woke, go broke," where any number of state governments are trying to make corporations cower and stop these implementation of these implementation of those investment or divestment or internal policies. You're beginning to see state government step in and try to micromanage business, which is, fascinating on a number of levels, given that, just 10, 20 years ago, the Republican dogma was to leave the market alone and let the market decide and to keep government out of these decisions. And they have done a 180 and are doing the exact opposite because of the culture wars. Another area that you will see is a continuation of this critical race theory, the definition of critical race theory actually being an academic discipline that is only in very, usually graduate study programs, not even in undergraduate higher ed, but then the redefinition of critical race theory to be anything we don't like or that makes us uncomfortable when we're talking about race. You'll continue to see that play out, and that is a religious freedom issue because many of our congregations are trying to reconcile many of the sins of our past. And so that is another area to watch. You're going to see it play out with LGBT issues. Of course, there are a large and many congregations and denominations at this point that are now affirming versus the other side, which is trying to call us names and call us groomers. Anything that affirms the LGBT population is now grooming. It's ridiculous. You're going to see it play out with bodily autonomy and reproductive choice, where if you advocate that doctors should have some clarity about when they intervene to save the mother's life, you'll get called a baby killer. So you're going to see it play out in that front. You'll see it play out in the area of public schools, where increasingly there's an attempt to privatize the public school system, to take money out of the public school system so that suburban white kids can go to private school and be subsidized to do so, by and large. And so you'll see it play out there because most of that money will not just go to a private school, but it'll go to a religious private school. And so you are then taxing people of all faiths to educate a child in a religion that is not theirs. So to put it bluntly and specifically, you'll be taxing Methodists and Episcopalians and Muslims to educate kids in Catholicism or whatever it may be, evangelical Christianity or whatnot. And, how's that really going to play out when the Muslim school comes to apply for their eligibility to receive taxpayer funds? That's kind of the where we're headed with that, if that were to actually become policy. So we need to stop that and get back to James Madison's original principle that not, 3 pence of a taxpayer, the taxpayer should not have to pay even 3 pence to a religion that's not their own. All of these things have one thing in common. It's that all these things have this in common, is that there's an attempt to establish a preference. It's government putting the thumbs on the scales of free religious choice and saying we have a preference for this one, not that one. Where things that white evangelical Protestants believe get explicit legal protections, whereas things that, say, the Jewish community believe on reproductive autonomy, that's not really religious liberty in their view.
Right.
So that's the establishment of religious preference. We think that this one religious belief gets preference over this other religious belief. And that's not how religious freedom has ever worked in the United States of America. That's the subtle and slow imposition and establishment of a religion.
Will it be that overt that they're making religious liberty, religious freedom arguments on all these different issues, or we have to read between lines?
Both. I think a little of both. So if I think back to last session, there was a spectacular debate on the House floor when they passed the trans sports bill. And one representative, who is a seminary student, made the argument that, it is true in Hebrew, the name for God is plural. When you use a pronoun, it's plural. That's true in all the Abrahamic faiths, where that, and so he was making a theological argument. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but he was making a theological argument that had a basis in academic thought. And it so offended another member of the House floor that he got up and began to give his version of how Genesis goes. And they got into a big thing on the House floor on the front and back microphone over interpretations of Genesis. So sometimes it's that overt. And again, this was a bill about letting children that identify as trans play sports in school. So sometimes it is quite overt. And other times, like with like with vouchers, it's far less overt, where they make a civil rights argument that we're just trying to help poor kids get out of failing schools, and never actually talk about the full policy problems and shortcomings that vouchers have had ever since they first proposed them. I mean, in the 19th century, or tried to re-implement them after Brown versus Board of Education.
Also, a friendly reminder to make sure that you're following and subscribe to Ledge TV, Texas Impact, on YouTube, and Ledge TV on Twitter, so you can see highlights of the legislative session throughout the 140 days. Josh, I know you've talked about this so many times that I could probably give the answer myself, but the answer to combating, these thoughts, these viewpoints during session is for a coalition of religious groups to advocate and vote together, right?
Yeah, that's 100% right, Scott. The answer to bad representation is more democracy, and engaging and being involved in the democracy. And the most basic fundamental thing you do in a democracy as a citizen of a democracy is you vote. So we're at this kind of interesting point where you have a white evangelical majority, former majority, that's now a minority on the wane, and an emerging, diverse, hoping to realize itself coalition, I guess, is the emerging coalition that's quite diverse and hasn't quite found itself or found each other, that is emerging. Because if you add up the 12% that are white mainline Protestant, and the 3% that are Jewish, Muslim, or Unitarian, that's 15% of the state, which is the exact same number as the 15% that are white, evangelical, and Protestant. When you make common cause with black Protestants, that gets you to 8%. 8 plus 15 is about 23%. When you look at the 29% of the state that's Catholic, you can make common cause on any single issue, including reproductive choice, with 1/2 of the people in the pew. So 1/2 of 28% is 14%. You add that to the 23% that's we've already talked about, and you're looking at getting pretty close to a majority. You can make common cause with those who are unaffiliated, those who have left religion or don't claim a religion, who are often on the same page in a big tent coalition on many of the issues that we care about. We don't need to be seeing the electoral outcomes that we're seeing in Texas. But we still have a lot of apathy. We still have a lot of not yet. If you the majority is already here, but they have not yet asserted themselves electorally at the polls, and that is why we see the outcomes we see in our legislative process.
Josh, there are going to be a lot of opportunities for people to engage over the course of the next few months, starting with Interfaith Advocacy Days next Tuesday, January 10th at 9 o'clock at the Capitol, and online on Texas Impact's YouTube and Facebook page. Great opportunity to kick off the session with prayer and reflection that will include many of our elected representatives. We'll have United Women of Faith coming to Austin for a conference at the end of January. We'll have Texas Impact's Interfaith Advocacy Days in February. We have legislative engagement groups. We have the Rapid Response Team. We have issue champion teams that groups can join. There are a lot of opportunities for people to engage, but what do you hope listeners will be doing over the next 140 days and beyond?
I hope listeners, my number one hope is that they don't focus on session, have things not go their way, and then give up. I want listeners to think long-term and not short-term. How session is going to apply over the next 140 days, I hope that they are engaging it in order to do work over the next 570 until they meet again in 2025. Because that's really what's important, is going back to your local community. And that's where your vote counts the most as a citizen of a democracy, is in local government, where your vote is the most potent as a fraction of the electorate, and also it's closest to you. And the things that happen at the state level get implemented at a local level. And so whatever happens at the state level, we will keep you abreast of, but hopefully you're not just consuming that knowledge, but you're then taking that knowledge out into the community and focused on how they're implementing it or not implementing it, depending on how you want it to go at a local level. Because we're continuing to hear about many fights at school boards. We need to know what local law enforcement is doing to keep us safe, because we continue to have mass shootings, and some of them are politically motivated. Political violence is becoming the new norm. We need to know what local government, what local law enforcement, what state law enforcement is doing to protect us. That is stuff you could do at a local level. So much policy gets implemented at a local level that the old axiom that all politics is local is still true. And we hope that you go, because there's no way a statewide group like Texas Impact can cover 254 counties, 1,100 municipalities, 1,200 school boards. It's not possible unless you are doing the work of your faith communities. I was going to say of the church, but that's not interfaith enough. If you're not doing the work locally at your congregational level, it's just not possible. So you've got to be engaged locally and then in partnership with somebody statewide.
All right, Josh, I really appreciate the time today and look forward to talking with you quite a bit more over the course of the next few months.
Yeah, see you soon, I'm sure.
All right, friends, I think that's enough Weekly Witness for this week, but this is just the beginning of a busy 50th anniversary year, so we look forward to being with you in person or online beginning next week and bringing you more Weekly Witness content throughout the year. Make sure that you're subscribed to the Weekly Witness podcast and do your part to invite your friends to listen and share. And leave us a rating or review and work that algorithm so even more Texans of faith will find us and join in the movement for justice in Texas. And remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atman, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.